stream is about to start. We'll talk about code or whatever we'll talk about today. It's about to start, so please hang tight while I check that everything is okay. Sound check, camera check, lights check. How's my hair? Oh, wait, I don't have any hair. Maybe put some pants on and I am good to go. So get ready wherever you are, 'cause this stream is about to start. Get ready wherever you are, 'cause this stream is about to start. Hi, my name is Leandro Facchinetti, and let's write some code together, shall we? What we have on the menu today is, to begin with, something that is not terribly exciting, perhaps, at first sight, but it will be interesting, I think, and hopefully it will be quick, and that is quantization. It came up last Friday on our coding session when we were doing interactivity. So we were doing pressing buttons, hovering over things and whatnot. I don't really remember why it came up actually, but it came up in that context. Why did we need to quantize things? Oh, because we are controlling a slider by clicking and dragging on the user interface. And that slider, we want to keep that value in certain boundaries. That may be too abstract, so give me a moment and I will bring up the effect that I'm talking about and I'll show you what I mean. So we have this waveform display thing that we have been working on. Looks like this. And you can zoom into the waveform just like that, but you can also click and drag to zoom in and out. And when you're doing this, you are using the user interface to adjust the slider. You can see them moving simultaneously. So I want to both control the boundaries from 0.1 to 10, as well as control the increment. So it goes in increments of 0.1. And that is quantization. We want the increment to be in steps of 0.1. Now, naturally, quantization also comes up in all other aspects of music production and plugins and audio effects. For instance, when you're dealing with MIDI, you may want to quantize nodes. So we are coming up with this auxiliary function. Given certain parameters, we'll find the places where things should be, either a slider moving across, or some MIDI nodes on a grid, or anything else that you would like to quantize. So we're doing the auxiliary function that does quantization. And we came up with something quick and dirty. There is only one aspect that I think we need to fix. So we'll start writing tests for the slider or for the quantization function. And that's to address this to-do right here. So that's the first thing we are going to do. The second thing we are going to do is we are going to look at our initial tentative implementation of mouse interactivity. So the thing that is currently driving this thing. And right now it is hard-coded in the effect, in the plugin. We will extract that into the library. And just to recap, in case you're new here, welcome. What we have been doing here on this channel for a couple months at this point, almost half a year. No, oh boy. What we have been doing for the past 10 months in this channel is working on a library to do JSFX or real-time audio effects in REAPER, and we are mostly focusing on the visual aspects, so showing the waveform to show what the audio effect will do to your audio. And this is actually the first plugin that is coming out of this endeavor, the first plugin that is using the library, and what it does is simply show the waveform for the audio that is coming in, as simple as it could be, but useful nevertheless, because you could put this on the mixer control panel, for instance, and then it looks like this, which can be useful. Sort of neat. All right, so now let's write tests for this function. And before I even write the first test, I do know that I will want to run this test, and it will be right after clip. So let's invoke the test. And right now, this will fail because a function has to have a body. And if I do this, then the test should be passing. Let's load the tests. Quantize tests are passing. So now let's write some actual tests. If I try to quantize 1.5, or I guess 1.5 can be contentious, I'll quantize 1.75 with a minimum of 0 and increments of 1. I expect that to be 2. Or perhaps 1. I don't think I am doing rounding. I think I am doing truncation. Do I care about this? Or do I want to have this as an option? Because quantization is really just another name for rounding things, right? It's rounding things up or down or rounding the middle. What do you think would be the most useful? Well, in the context of what we are doing, which is to control a slider, it does not matter a whole lot. But in the context of, for instance, arranging MIDI, I think it makes sense to use floor. And perhaps in other contexts, it would make sense to round things to the nearest integer. So in this case, it would round up. But I don't think that this is the case for, at least to begin with. So we'll start with quantize with floor, and if we find that we need other rounding algorithms, we can do scaling and we can do rounding to the nearest integer. And I guess I will take note of this like this, even though, so this is clear, this is the ceiling function, so it would round even 1.25 up to 2. But round is not really a function that comes with JSFX. It is a function that comes with other languages, I think. It does not come with JSFX. But there is this little trick you can do that is, we saw this somewhere else before on the stream. You just take the floor of something plus half of the increment, and that implements round. And I will not get into why and how this works. Just when we get there, we get there. For now, it will be floor. So I guess I will make it super clear that we are always rounding it down by having these 3 tests. And this should work. Quantization, tests are passing, great. But there is this notion of thinking about the minimum. And what do I mean about this? Well, what's the point of this to-do item? It's something that I intuitively sort of understood on Friday. Over the weekend, I thought about it, and now I think I really understand. And I tried to explain what I meant by this, but it didn't really understand it so well, so I couldn't explain it so well. Now I think I can explain it relatively well, and I think that we'll be able to write tests for this, so it will make it very clear. And you can see that right now the minimum is not being used here. But now let's, and it's just assumed to be 0. But now let's use the minimum. So suppose that we want to start at 1 and the value we are trying to quantize is 3 and we are going in steps of 2. So that means that the possible outputs are 1, 1 plus 2, which is 3, Oh, so perhaps that's not going to be the best example, is it? Yeah, let's take steps of 5. Making our numbers bigger here will make things easier to understand. So our possibilities are 1, 6, which is 1 plus 5, and 11, which is 1 plus 5 plus 5, and 16, and so on. 21, 26, 31, 36. So that's why we have the minimum here, because it offsets the whole quantization by a certain amount. So in this case, I expect this to round down. So it will be quantized to 1. But 7 will round down to 6. And just one more. 15 should round down to 11. And that's the importance of this minimum value here, which maybe could be called the start. I'll call it the start. I don't know, not too sure about this name, but I'll call it the start value, or I'll leave minimum. Minimum is okay. So with that, I think we have covered all the edge cases I wanted to think about when it comes to quantization. This I don't expect to pass because the minimum is not being taken in account. So I expect that this will not round to 1, but to 0. And this will round to 5 instead of 6. And this will round to, I guess, 15 instead of 11. So I expect the test to fail now. And it fails. So far, so good. So now let's take the minimum in account. I think that the way we can do this is by subtracting the minimum when we start, and this way we are translating this value so that it is at the origin again, so that it is relative to 0. So we subtract the minimum to begin with, and then after all the computation has been done, we add the minimum. So we offset everything back, scaling everything back. So I think that this formula implements this notion of quantization. And there you go, here it is, the test is passing, we did it. So I will commit what I have. I will commit this as well. It has nothing to do with our streams, but it was just there, so I'm committing it. And then let's check this slider function, which essentially is a glorified call to quantization and clipping, but it is relying on quantization. So I will not bother with writing tests for slider right now, because it is just a helper function that relies on the other two, on quantization and clipping. But we can go in the interface and move the slider around to see how it behaves. Yeah, and it seems to be working okay. It is giving us steps of 0.1 at most. It seems to be going faster than that, but that's not because of the quantization. The quantization is guaranteeing that we are not ending up with a value that looks like this, for instance, which is a valid value. It's just not in the range that we, or in the increments that we like. All right, I think that did it. So first thing I promised I would do on the stream, check. Let's go to the second. That is much harder. So happy that I said something would be easy, and it actually was. So rare for this to happen. All right, so let's get to the second thing I promised I would do on the stream. And that is to find abstractions for these notions of mouse interactivity. And perhaps finding abstractions for this is too early because we only have one case, but we can sort of see how things will pan out when we have multiple interactive areas. So I think it makes sense to have this right now. And the first thing we have to decide is, how do we want to call this it's not really a button. In this case, it doesn't show up as a button. It's an interactive area. And a button will have some similarities. For instance, it will have the hover that changes the background color. It will be clickable. It will respond to double clicks, which by the way resets. So we already have the notion of double clicking. So a button has some similarities with what we have going on, but a button is not exactly this, or I guess this is not exactly a button. So I'm hesitant to call this a button. I think I will call this a very generic, kind of meaningless name. I will call it an interactive area. I know it's not perfect, but it will do for now. Perhaps later we'll find some better name for this. Right, so let's go over the code that we wrote and move it into the library. And while we are doing that, we will review the abstractions we have in place and what abstractions we would like to have. I guess the first step may be for me to just rename all of these to introduce the underscore dot, which is part of the library, and I probably should have done this to begin with. But all the variables and functions in the library are in the underscore namespace. So I will add that namespace real quick. The JSFX, the bare JSFX namespace is for variables that occur in an effect using the library, and particularly the variables in the JSFX block. And this is super important because you don't want those variables to clash in name with variables from the sample section. In particular, you don't want this channel, for instance, to clash with that one, because the user interface and the audio are being processed simultaneously. Okay, so that was easy, just renaming. Now let's go over what we have step by step and move things over to, I think that there is already a place where we want to move these things to. It is the body of this function that must be called every time you enter the JSFX block, and it will do a bunch of things like detect whether the sample section is running and so on. It's already doing this, it is doing that, and this needs to occur before we do any other user interface stuff, because we will be using mouse capture, and for that to work, we need to call this. It's something that Justin Johnson said we needed. The JSFX documentation, I think, since then has been updated to say that it is needed. It's needed. I don't know why. Don't ask me why. I just know that it's needed. I will commit the renamings and then we'll start going over what we have. So we have these two notions that I think I can just cut and paste. I really like what this is doing for us. It is reading the mouse X position, and it is giving us the previous position, which can be handy, but even more useful, it is giving us the difference. So as you move the cursor around, there will be 2 consecutive runs of the JSFX block, and we will have a hold. The library, we can just give this to us. We will have a hold on how much the cursor has moved. So if you just leave the cursor there, that's 0. But as you move the cursor, we'll have access to that from frame to frame. And that's how we do, for instance, this. We just add in this case, the Y difference, but we just add the Y difference to the current zoom. Perhaps I will not just simply cut and paste. I will, because, okay, so here's my reasoning. We have mouse X and Y, those are given to us by JSFX. But then we have these variables to hold the previous one and the difference. So I think it makes sense to have another variable that is just this. And it is just mouse X. So we are introducing a variable just for consistency in terms of naming. And let's see if we find somewhere else where we have been using this. Yeah, there are other places. So I will rename to use this name as well, because I think that the code will read better like this. It is a bit longer, but at least it's consistent with the previous value and the difference. And with that, I believe I should be able to cut this from here, paste this there, and I just took the code from a particular effect and put it in the library. And I think that this is the ideal way of coming up with abstractions. You start with something concrete, you start with one effect, you make things work, you see the similarities, you imagine how things could be used, or perhaps you wait until you see a couple more instances of the thing being used, and then you extract into the library. I think that this is just a textbook example of how to come up with an abstraction. Right. So now the effect should still work. And it seems to. Oh, perhaps not. I can no longer click and drag here. Yikes. Why would that be? Let's investigate what these variables hold. So mouse X and mouse Y here, they are okay. Now mouse X difference and mouse Y difference are also changing. So that should be fine. Perhaps this is no longer good. What is this variable? Where is it coming from? Really, where is this variable? Where is it coming from? It is coming from here. Oh, these variables should not have the underscores, because these variables are actually something that have to do with the effect. That's what's up. So I guess the first step we took broke this. And perhaps I didn't test after taking the renaming step. I will actually do a search, JSFX X and Y. Okay, now we are good. Oh, it's still not working. Why would that be? I have no idea. Hey, hello. How are you doing? It's great to have you here. I guess what we are doing on the stream today is something that is so bread and butter for you, because you are much more knowledgeable than I am on this user interface stuff. So if you catch my mistakes, then please let me know on the chat, okay, John? Thank you. And right now, you can start helping me right now, because I am already baffled by something. I don't really understand why we are not clicking and dragging anymore. Doesn't really make any sense to me. The GFX X and Y are there. Oh, I think I know. The width and height are also there. They are also wrong. Okay, so I figured this one out by myself. But the next one, you help me out, John. I'm 90% confident that this will work now. And it does. But for some reason, it seems like hoovering is not working. I don't see a change in the hover stage. Oh, I think it's because down here, I am not using the variables with the underscores as I should. Yeah, okay. I have to revisit all these variable names that I mindlessly renamed, because not all of them are part of the library. So these are probably going to be part of the library. So are these. But these are not part of the library. So I will remove the underscores from there. Remove the underscores from there. And all the rest should be part of the library. Okay, so now we should be back to the state where we began with. Yeah, hoovering works, clicking and dragging works, the zoom cannot go beyond the limits, and double clicking resets everything. Okay, got it. Okay, I can give you a quick recap. I'm working on my library, is2, and in particular, I am working on this little utility, kind of silly effect that is supposed to be on the MCP, and it's supposed to show you the waveforms. Really, the intent is that we are showing off a component of my library, a component that draws waveforms and scrolls it across the screen. And there are plenty of controls for this component. So you can plot multiple channels if you want. You can change the duration that you're plotting. So now this is going to scroll across more slowly because it's plotting more of the audio. It's plotting 10 seconds worth of the audio. While in this, it's almost just showing the shape of the wave because it's plotting 5 milliseconds of the audio. And you have all sorts of controls, like you can take the square root, much in the same way that you can change the waveforms on the timeline to show the square root. Where is this? Scale by square root. And you can also go vertical instead of horizontal, and it goes like this. And there are all these tricky things to implement that restart on playback. So if you move the cursor around, it restarts, or it does not. And this was super tricky to implement. We have different colors, but that's relatively straightforward. We also have a grid where, I guess to begin with, it doesn't load in a way that is very readable. But yeah, it has a grid with the axis and the scales. And it has this zoom thing. And you can control the zoom thing by clicking and dragging. So I expect people to, as I say here, find settings that they like, colors, and whether to show the grid, all of that. Find something that they like, and then either put this on a track template or put this on some effects chain, and then load that on tracks. And it works, and it's supposed to show up on the MCP or on the TCP, which I think that the TCP is less useful, but it also looks much better. I mean, this looks super nice and big, and it refreshes at 60 frames per second. So yeah, that's what I've been up to. That's what I'm working on right now. And in particular right now, I am finding the things that I like about this click and drag situation that I have going, and I'm extracting that. I'm creating abstractions for that in my library. Okay, so there is this mouse capture thing that is a bitmap, and we decomposed the bitmap on these variables so that we can say left button instead of saying the first bit, and we can say you are holding down Control instead of saying the third bit. Oh, I'm glad you like it. And Tail is here. Hello. It's great to have you here, Tail. I'm going to tease people. Probably this Thursday on this stream, we'll have Tail over as a guest, and we'll be talking about, and I guess John is going to like this, we're going to be talking about modeling analog circuits using LT-Spice and also using other things beyond LT-Spice. And Tail has a lot of experience doing this. He has been working on this kind of thing for his own company as well as for Arturia. We'll do nothing as sophisticated as what Tail does, but we'll do something simple and we'll see how the process goes. What kinds of things would you want to analyze using LT-Spice, where it falls short, things that... And I guess the interesting thing that probably John is going to appreciate is that the approach that Tail uses, as far as I know, as far as I can tell, is similar. It is to observe what a circuit does, or to hear what a circuit does and see what how the circuit affects the audio, but then don't do any kind of physical modeling. So not necessarily using nodal analysis or wave digital filters and whatnot, and instead just take off-the-shelf algorithms and recreate that sound. So if you are doing a circuit that filters a tone control, for instance, on a pedal, you extract the essence of that filter and recreate that using some biquad, for instance. So that's pretty much the approach that John is using on his effects. At least that was true when we last talked to him on the stream 1 or 2 months ago. Oh, that's exactly how you do the mouse implementation. Great. Yeah, the approach I'm taking for this library and for this part of the library, in particular the mouse interactivity and the user interface stuff, the approach I'm taking for all of this is I read the JSFX documentation, which is like 3 paragraphs long, and I'm sort of recreating everything from scratch, from first principles, not because it is the most straightforward thing to do. It's not the most productive thing to do. It's probably not the smartest thing to do. But I find a lot of joy in finding things out by myself and recreating things from scratch. So that's what I'm up to. I don't try to be clever. I don't try to be productive. I just try to enjoy the ride. So we are doing things like clicking and dragging and whatnot, and we are doing that from first principles, from having read the documentation and trying to come up with strategies to do what we want to do. Now, there are times when we end up finding exactly the same implementation as someone else did, and it seems to be the case this time. There are times when we simply cannot really find something that works super well. And then we have to read someone else's code. And I think I will at some point read how Tail does his user interfaces, you, John, are doing your user interfaces, and how Psyche is doing user interfaces, and Gerange, all these people who have come before me and did awesome work in terms of user interfaces. I will look at how you all are doing this. And perhaps I will copy some things. But to begin with, I thought it would be fun to just try to come up with things by myself. And this is similar to the approach we took to the waveform drawing component itself. We spent months exploring all the different ways you could go about drawing a waveform on the screen. In the end, the thing that really worked was probably one of the simplest implementations. And it was sort of inspired by the oscilloscope that comes with REAPER, that we did a dramatic reading of. But I think I at least enjoyed a lot the process of exploring all these different concepts. Drawing off screen and bleeding the image into the screen. And how do you erase some partially loaded image? All of those issues we had to solve for the different approaches was a lot of entertainment, for me at least. Oh, okay. So John is working on an effect that is using impulse responses. Interesting. Do you want to share more? Do you want to tell us what you're using impulse responses for? Or do you want to keep it a secret? And are you using impulse responses sort of in the traditional way as just convolving, or are you doing something different? And speaking of convolution, how do you do convolution? Because Reaper comes with a complex convolution function that you can just call. But when talking to Justin Johnson of REAQ, he's not using convolution that comes with JSFX. He hand-rolled his own convolution implementation that is just shifting variables. It's kind of interesting. We talked about it when we had him over on the stream in the beginning of the year. But it seems like doing it that way is better, at least for REAQ. It may not be better if you have bigger impulse responses, but at least for the small impulse responses of, I think, 64 samples used on the oversampling in REAQ, that was good to hand roll everything. Okay, all right. You keep your secret. I'm looking forward to hearing from you, and people who are also interested can just go and follow John's channel on YouTube. I think that's the main way to get news from Toucan plugins, right? Right, so coming back here, these are just pretty names for the mouse capture thing. We can just cut and paste this. There's nothing special on this. Next, there are these events. The events are not the same as the state. So this tells us that the button is pressed. The button is down. This is the state of the button. An event is the button was up and now it is down. An event happens only once, at least only once every click. A state is true multiple times. So as the JSFX block runs over and over and over, this will only be true once for every click, but this will be true over and over while you're holding the button down. That said, I think that we just want to copy this over. So there are actually two events. The first is, oh, hang on, we will also need to copy stuff that is way below. This stuff. Yeah. So this is actually something interesting. We are storing the previous state of the button. So remember, not events, states in this case. We are just storing the previous state of the button. Was the button down the last time we have been around the loop? And I'm doing this as the last thing, which makes sense. First, we update this variable. Then we use the variable. And then we store its previous state for next time. And the next time we go around the loop, we'll have the previous state over here. But what that means, and I'm doing this update right here as the last thing in the JSFX function. Sorry, on the JSFX function. But what that means is that I will have to do all the events that depend on this. I will have to capture all of them in here. I will leave a bunch of spaces here. So anything that has to do with pressing buttons, for instance, double clicks, has to do with pressing buttons. I will have to compute whether a double click has happened in here. And the consequence of this is that after this function call is over, so when you start running the user code, and by user I mean the developer using the library, when you start running the effect code, it will no longer have access to the real previous state of the left button. So that's something to keep in mind. You could have access to the previous state of the mouse, not even that. So these variables are public. These variables are private. I wonder if I should have some sort of naming convention to establish this, but I don't have one right now. And I would just proceed with that, but I will leave myself a note to think about it. Think about a naming convention for private variables. For example, previous. Or perhaps I wouldn't use this as a naming convention. I would just say that this variable is local to the JSFX function. That's a possibility, and it can be kind of weird because you would expect the variable to be reset every time we call the function. So you would expect the variable to be reset in the beginning of every block, but it's not. There is this quirk of JSFX that local variables keep their state across invocations, and they keep this state different. So there are different states in the JSFX block and on the sample section. So if you have the same function being called from different places, and the function has a local variable, and you persist that local variable value, it will be different for the different sections of code. Now, I haven't really tested this. I read about it. It is in the documentation, I think. But I haven't really needed that. But this could be a case where I could just hide this variable from public use by making it local. And I think it would just work. So I'll leave that idea here as well. As so often, I used convolution processing that already existed. Okay. News from Toucan plugins, always on YouTube. Now you know. Go follow John. All right, so the event of the button being pressed is when the previous state was that the button was not pressed. And now the state is that the button is pressed. So it captures that transition from off to on. And that's this event. And this is the converse, from on to off. And as it says here, we should do other buttons. We already have right button and middle button, and we are handling them over here. So we should be able to just copy and paste this and change from left button to right, and from left button to middle. Missed one. And there you have it. So now we can capture the events of the button being pressed for all three buttons. We also have these. Do I have them here? Yes. So these are the keyboard modifiers. We are just storing them for next time. I don't think that we will want to use this a whole lot. Generally, you're interested in one event like this. The button has been pressed, and then you would look at the state of the modifier, the current state of the modifier, and that's all. You typically are not interested in the control key has been pressed, right? You typically don't care about this. So perhaps we don't need to store the previous state, because we will not be doing anything like down and up or double click for keyboard modifiers. I don't think it makes a lot of sense, right? There's nothing that is, or there are a few things that are like press command twice, right? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. You don't have the double click, so to speak. Now, this is not unheard of. For instance, in macOS, if you want to have that little pop-up menu with emoji, you can press the FN function, sorry, not the FN function, the FN key. The FN key, the function key, you can press it twice and it opens up this dialog. So it's not unheard of. You could have some sort of interactivity that is like press shift twice and then click. But I am not a fan, so I will not store these variables. And I don't think that they are used anywhere. So it should be safe to just take them out. And then I will not have anything like these for the keyboard modifiers, just for the mouse buttons. What's next? I have a bunch of comments and I don't really remember what they are for, so I'll just skip ahead. If we find that we need it, then we'll look at it, but I would bring it into the library for the time being. My goal here is to clean this up for this to look like an effect again, not part of the library. Okay, so next we have more events. Let's look at how this works and then bring it into the library. Naturally, this is for double click. So how do we know if a double click is just occurring? Okay, so this is an event, not a state. It's an event. Perhaps I should have an event in the name here, because it can be confusing when you're reading code if this is an event or a state, or if this is an event or a state. It could be read as a state, the state of the button being down, but it's an event. For now, I won't introduce, because the more, if we already have a long name, the more I introduce names and annotations, the longer this gets, and the code at one point becomes unreadable, so I will not. But if we find ourselves getting confused by this being a state and this an event, I will revisit this decision. This is another event. So a double click happens when the state, so there is this state associated with a double click. When the state is greater than 0 and the button has been pressed. I just clicked on it. Then, if I have just clicked on it, this will, oh, interesting, this will reset. Okay, so there is something to think about, because if you do a double click and continue clicking, it will continue to trigger the double click situation, which I think should be okay, but perhaps we would like to avoid that. So perhaps we would want to have something like this. If it is not a double click and the mouse is down, then set this to 15. And by making it this way, you cannot do consecutive double clicks by just clicking over and over and over. And this resets this state. This state is essentially a counter. And then I update the counter. I decrement the counter by 1, but I never let it go below 0. So that's what this is up to. And this is how double clicking detection works. And it seems to work just fine. Let's load the plugin again to see all of this in action. So I can make this bigger, and when I double click, it works. But if I click and wait and click, it doesn't register as a double click. Click and wait and click versus double click. And there you go. So let's move this into the library. And again, this is a public variable. This is a private variable. And these 3 lines need to be in this order. Well, I guess these last 2 could be interchanged, but it's important that we have this line first because we want to detect a double click to prevent this from triggering the next double click. And oh, perhaps we would even like, if you have a double click, we would like to reset this to 0 real quick. Because if you are doing 3 clicks in this time span, I don't reset you back to 0. Yeah, I would do it that way. Let's read how this works again. How do I know if there is a double click? Because the state is, or the counter really, is greater than 0, and the button has just been pressed. So the double click registers on mouse down, by the way, which seems to be consistent with most of the interface in REAPER and even some of the interface in other applications. There are some clicks that register on mouse up, but I think that double clicks always register on mouse down. As far as we did a very quick investigation, and that seems to be the case. Double clicks register on mouse down. So if the mouse is down, I will reset this to 15. Or not if the mouse is down. See, if the mouse has just been pressed down, then we will update this to 15, except if this is the click that caused the double click to happen, then I reset it back to 0 to prevent multiple, or I guess triple clicks from registering as 2 double clicks, if you know what I mean. I don't love how there are so many conditionals. I have a feeling that there is a more elegant way of expressing this notion, but this is what I have so far. And then to update the state, I just decrement, and it doesn't matter that this is setting to 0 because this could get you to -1, but we are always taking the maximum between that and 0, so we are always capping things to be at least 0. So this should do it for left button. Let's see if this works once more, and I will copy and paste for middle button and right button. Okay, so moving up still works, and double click works. But if I click and wait and click, then it doesn't register as a double click. Great. And this double click is resetting, so I cannot really test that whole logic for triple click. I guess I could if I just increase this number a whole lot, but I won't. I'll just trust that this works because it's relatively straightforward. Now let's take this block and copy it twice for right button and middle. Why do I say left button, right button, and middle? It doesn't really make sense, does it? It's either middle button or it's just left and right. With the interest of making things less verbose, I will change this to be just left and right. I suppose I can do just this. I think that this will work, but I do want to read the diff real quick to see if I haven't affected other parts of the library, and it seems like I did not. I also want, oh, I was looking at the waveform, not the library. Let's look at the library. Yeah, okay. I need to test this once more because I did a change that could break things. Okay, didn't break anything. So next, we have these states, and this is where it will get interesting. So here we are detecting states, not events, states. These are states like disabled and hover and active. So right now, I will call this the initial state of this interactive area. When I put my cursor on top, it is on the hover stage. When I click, or sorry, when I press down the button and I don't let go, it is on the active stage. And then I can move things across and whatnot. So previously we were talking about events. Double click is an event. Down is an event. But now we are talking about different states, and you get into these states by virtue of some event happening. So if you think about this as a state machine, states are these. They are the situation of the interactive area. And these are events that transition you from state to state. And I like to reason about the user interface as a bunch of state machines, one for each component. Right. So one thing that currently I'm not treating, and I don't think I will, is the fact that you could do a double click by clicking outside and then inside, and that registers as a double click. Now, I don't really know how REAPER handles this and how other apps handle this, but I think it's a reasonable thing. I think it's not necessarily the best approach, but it's such an edge case that I will not worry about it. So click, click, and it resets. And I think that in other parts of REAPER where you can double click, for instance here, I think that if you click outside and then inside, it's not gonna work. Yeah, it doesn't register as a double click. For this to work, I would need to capture the events within the interactive area. And right now I'm not. I'm just capturing events globally. A double click has happened, right? And when a double click happens, if I am within boundaries, in other words, if I'm hovering, then I will do something. And that's why this is the current behavior. The click, move, and click works. I'll just let this be for now. So here I am detecting states like hover and active. And here I am doing things to the interactive area when the states are true. Not events, but states. And what is special about this is that I even fixed things to not have the underscore dot anymore, because these are not part of the library. The notion of hover and active, they are not part of, they're not global notions. They're not like a double click is a global notion so far. These are notions that have to do with a particular interactive area. So now I have to come up with a way of representing an interactive area. And I was thinking about this afternoon. There are different ways of representing something. We could use a data structure, but I was thinking, yeah, the problem with using a data structure for this is that we would need to allocate all of these data structures in the init block and blah, blah, blah. And I was thinking, what do we need to store in the data structure? And can we get away with not having a data structure in the sense of, for instance, the waveform display is a data structure with these fields. Can we get away without having that data structure? I think we can if we use the same hack that the mouse cap variable that comes with JSFX uses, and that's to use a bitmap. Because I was thinking about what do we want to store in this data structure. As far as I can tell, so far, we want to store the stage. And that's all. We could want to store like position and dimensions of an interactive area. And if we did, then we would need a proper data structure because we wouldn't be able to use a bitmap for numbers that are bigger. Or I guess we could because the numbers are within a certain bound, but then bitmaps really fall short. But so far, all I can think of are states. Is it disabled? Is it hovered? Is it active? And all the states are a single 1 or a 0, so I can use a bitmap for that. I experienced it to be less effort in coding when first check for event and stage, then check who is hovered. Exactly. It's good to have some social confirmation that this approach is feasible, because that's exactly what I'm thinking about doing, right? I'm thinking of first detecting that there is this stage of, or not really a stage, detection that there is this event of a double click. So I will be saying like an event of double click has happened. This is a global notion. You can see by the underscore dot. And then I check who has been double clicked. In this case, this component. And right now I have only one, but I will need to abstract this and make it something that you can have multiple of. So that's exactly the approach I'm about to take. Thanks for sharing that with me, sharing that this actually works. Okay, and if you do that, I guess it's inevitable that you will end up with this situation where you click, move, click, and that registers as a double click because the double click ends within the bounds of the interactive area. I will take it. I don't care. Hopefully, this will be good enough. We'll see. So let's come up with this idea of the interactive area. I know, such a lousy name. It is what it is. And I am following the convention of putting JFX in the beginning of every variable in the JFX block. Okay. So what's up with this? There will be this function called interactive area. This is going to be a bitmap. And I will... So this will be a bitmap. It will be a data structure, okay? But it will be a very special data structure in the sense that it is a bitmap. So it will be just a bunch of zeros and ones in a row. And I will not need to allocate this beforehand, which makes code a bit easier to work with. Particularly, and I guess that's why I care about this so much, is particularly when your interface changes as you're interacting with it. So perhaps you click on a button and a bunch more buttons will appear, for instance. In ReQ, you can add bands and then more and more sliders show up. And I guess it's the same slider just controlling different bands, but you know what I mean. I guess here I am adding buttons. So this little circle is an interactive area. And these are things that I need to be able to create arbitrarily many of. So if I have them as single values, it is a bit easier to work with. It's also possible to create arbitrarily many data structures in the heavier sense, where we have multiple fields that each can be an arbitrary number, instead of just being a bit field. So it's possible to allocate arbitrarily many of these, but it's much more troublesome. It requires some sort of allocation pool. It requires strategies for the allocator that we have not implemented yet. It really gets complicated. So if we can get away with bitmaps, it will be great. Let's see. So there will be this interactive area thing. And as I said, it's just a bitmap. And this is just updating the bitmap. So here I would just need to give it the I guess, position, right? I need to give it this. What is the area that I want to query, essentially, that I want to know what's happening there? So it's sort of querying that area. And for people who are following very closely, which I guess at this point is mostly me because I am very in the weeds here, but for people who are watching this very closely, we sort of have a precedent for this. We have another data structure that is not a bitmap, it's just a number, but it is a data structure that we don't allocate on the free memory store or on the heap, so to speak, that we don't allocate in this heavy sense of the waveform display that we need to allocate space for and that uses new memory. We have a data structure that is like this, and that's the circular counter. Of course, that is just a number. It doesn't need to be a bit field and whatnot, but you update a circular counter using this kind of strategy where you pass a variable and you assign to the same variable to update it in place. So you can see this, for instance, on the implementation of the circular buffer. We have a circular counter, and lo and behold, here is the pattern again. So you call the circular counter function with a right index to update the right index, so we don't have to allocate the right index in the free memory store. Very in the weeds, but there you go. So this interactive area needs to be updated. Let's implement this function. Now this cannot go here because this is the thing that we run when the JSFX block starts. So we want to have a separate function . And in this context, I don't need the JSFX prefix namespace because it is an argument to a function, so it's already a local name. But yeah, this interactive area situation, I guess I will call this, I'll put this in the block of, I don't know, JSFX interactivity. And it receives these dimensions and whatnot, and it needs to update the interactive area. So I now need to have the positions of the bits in this bitmap. And I'll call this the mask. So I will have disabled, hover, and active for now. And I guess I will have them in this order: hover, active, and disabled. Hover is going to be the rightmost bit. Active is going to be the second rightmost bit. Disabled will be the third rightmost bit. And how do I get something out of this bit field? No, these are masks, so masks should not start with 1. I guess I will write it like this. There you go, that makes more sense. So I'm just taking the number 1 and shifting it to the left by 0, shifting it to the left by 1 position, shifting it to the left by 2 positions. Effectively, this is the number 1, this is the number 2, this is the number 4. But written in this way that makes more sense for a mask. And how do I use this interactive area? Well, I will want to take the existing interactive area and I want to detect whether I am hovering. Let's bring in the algorithm for detecting hover because that's already implemented. Except that these variables need to be just x, these variables need to be just y, and these variables need to be just width and height. Right? So this is the logic that we need to compute whether we are hovering. And I can go over this again, just make sure that it works. So we take the current x position of the mouse and we check that it's within x and x plus width. That makes sense. And same for y. That also makes sense. So if I take my current bitmap, hang on, do I even need the notion of the previous bitmap to update? Is there something about hovering that is state dependent? There is not. But about active, yes, there is. So the previous state, oh, hang on. Yeah, okay, the previous state will affect the current state of active. Okay, so I do need to have this as a variable that I update. I need to pass this here for that to be available. Okay, so how do I update this? I don't really know so far. I will just introduce some local variables that will also make this whole thing easier to read, hopefully. Well, disabled is not something that we can update like this. Disabled is something that the user of the library, the programmer, will have to disable this externally somehow. This is just to update hover and active. And here we want to replace this with just that and this with just that. But of course, we will have to get a hold of the previous active state by looking into the interactive area and active. So this is how you can use this stuff. You can end with the mask. And I don't know, I feel like this could be a bit weird for people using the library, so I will have some auxiliary functions. I will have some auxiliary functions for this. And I think I will have this like that. Yeah, I think that this will be better. What I'm thinking about is that I will want to do some shifting of these values here when I'm composing the new interactive area. So I actually want to have the offsets in the bit mask here, and then I will do the offsetting here, but I will also do the offset of the hover itself to put it in position for the bit mask. I think that this was how we are going to do things. But let's review that these auxiliary functions actually make sense. So these are the positions of the bits on the bit mask, or the offsets. These are auxiliary functions, so we can just see if there are any typos. It seems to be okay, but as I said, I do want to be able to set this disabled situation externally. So I will have 2 of these. And because they have different numbers of arguments, I don't really need to do any naming thing for this to work. This is a getter, this is a setter. It just works. Not sure I love it, but it is what it is. So you just take the interactive area and you take this like this. Yeah, so this is a setter. Getter and setter. I think that this is gonna work. We'll see. And tail is saying, seeing some ands and or mixed, is what order are these processed, left or right, or does and come before or? Well, yeah, you're probably talking about this line. In almost every, I'm gonna say in every major programming language, not toy programming languages that I made in academia, but in every real programming language, the order of precedence is that first there is the and, first you do the and then you do the or. But I agree that that is sort of subtle, so I'll put parentheses to make this clear. It is redundant, but it is clearer this way, but usually or happens later. Usually, I think of and as multiplication and or as addition. That's how I remember this rule. And there is even a fancy name for this in the field of mathematical logic. This is in the conjunctive normal form when you have something in this shape. Yeah, I just looked up, and JSFX docs suggest that or comes before and. If that is the case, I would be surprised. So, and or false. Okay, let's see. Hang on, how do I test for this real quick? So this is the shape we had in our code. 2 ands, 1 or in the middle, just like this. How do we test the precedence of operators? I guess we can have something like this. So this is going to be false, and this is going to be true. No. How do I test this? Well, I guess just this is going to test it, doesn't it? I guess this will do, right? Because this is going to be false, and this is going to be true. So, if n first or second, that yields true. But if we have or first and second, see, so if or occurs first, we will end up with 1. Oh, and this is going to be true anyway. Fuck. How do I come up with a test for this? It's going to be tricky. Because this is going to be true, and then the whole thing is going to be true. Well, if I put false here, then it will be false. Yeah, so if this occurs first, this will be true, and that will be false. And if this occurs first, that will be false, and this will be true. Yeah, I got it. So there you have it. This is going to test what is the order in which JSFX executes things. I believe we are going to see true. And we do see true. Now, don't take my word for it, because I'm claiming about the order of operators as having precedence regardless of the order where they occur on the page. So to prove my point, I will also do this the other way around, right? Do it like this. So if the thing is happening just plain left to right, no precedence whatsoever, or I guess same precedence in that case, then we would see, in this case, we would see false or true, which is true. And if it's this order, we would see true and false, which is false. But I am claiming that we still are going to see 1. And I am wrong. We see 0 now. So it seems like it doesn't do any kind of order or precedence. It just goes from left to right. And this is surprising to me because it's unlike other programming languages. I have to test now. Let's test JavaScript. Not that JavaScript is the saner programming language that we want to compare to, but it's one that I have at hand. So the situation is true or false and false. That is true, see? So in JavaScript, that's true. In JSFX, that's false. Surprising behavior. Thanks for bringing this up. This was a deep, annoying bug waiting to happen. Thank you, Tail. Interesting and funny. Yeah. It's always funny to be wrong on the internet, isn't it? All right, let's punch this in the face. Let's finish this. I don't think we'll be able to finish this, but let's try. Is this thing even making sense? I think it is. We are taking the mask and we are going to the left a certain amount of positions. And that extracts things. To set, we will need to call this in the same way that we called that. So we'll need to call it with this pattern where the first argument is the thing you want to update. And then you have the interactive area and you want to either set or not this field. Oh, and what we want is not an and here. We want an or, except that we also want to be able to set this to 0. If we want to enable the position, if we want to enable the disabled stage, if we want to enable this stage, we want to OR this into the mask. But if we want to disable this, we want to AND this into the mask. I feel like there's something I could do with an exclusive OR. But I cannot think of anything, so I'll do this with a simple conditional. If I am trying to disable, then I will end with a 0. No, hang on, what am I doing? I will want to take the opposite of this. Oh, fuck, this is going to be complicated. I want to end with a number that is all ones except for that position. So I'll have to use the mask in a different way. I'll need to do a bunch of ones. So that is XOR 0 and oh, I can do it like this. Bit manipulation is confusing. I can go to the left by that amount, and then I can take the XOR of that and end into the math. Oh, this is not beautiful code, is it? And when I do that, I can just use disabled here. I will need to go through this step by step, but I think we have it right here. Funny seeing you thinking how to true, false, true. Yeah. I was not expecting to do this tricky business, but here we are. Let's think through this. Let's say that my interactive area is just all zeros. No states are enabled. And I want to enable this state. Never mind that this state happens to be called disabled. I just want to enable this state that is called disabled, okay? Of course. It's not confusing enough. So now that we have that test effect, I want to test the XOR, because I don't really remember how it works, but I think that this should be a bunch of ones. So it should be a large number. Error parsing, great. How do I do XOR in JSFX? Bitwise operations XOR. I cannot do unary XOR. I can only do binary XOR. What I want is not necessarily XOR, it's the complement. Well, there is an easy way for me to generate a mask with a bunch of ones. I guess I can use that. So I can use, hang on, it's the other way around. It's like this. So this should be 0. This should be 1. This should be 1 plus 2, which is 3. And this should be 1 plus 2 plus 4, which is 7. Okay, this works. I'm going to stop now. So we want to have this. I guess I will have another variable for this, which is the size, which is this number that I want to put here. Oh, but I cannot put a variable in that context, can I? This is not valid. Cannot put a variable here. So I'll have to just have this hard-coded number there. Or perhaps I could have a name for this hard-coded number. That would be better. So I take the mask and no, I shouldn't be ending. I should be XORing. Yeah, I think that will do. But then what's the point? I am really confused. I don't think I will be able to get this done now. So I'm just going to wrap this up, and tomorrow we'll be back here to work with bits. It would be a lot of fun. I hope you can join me tomorrow and we'll talk about bits. I will figure out a way to do this bit mask. It's like quantization. It's such a simple thing. Just subtract and then add, right? We worked on quantization in the beginning of the session today. The solution was simply to subtract and then add, but I had to think about this over a weekend. I probably could look it up, but I didn't. I thought about it over the weekend, not for a whole lot. I didn't think about this for an hour. I thought about it for a couple minutes, but I had to think about it over the weekend, let it simmer in the back of the brain, and then we were able to knock this out real quick. I guess the same will be true of the interactive area, and in particular, this Persky little bit flipping situation. So I will just commit what I have. It's completely broken. I don't really care. Let's just make sure that I haven't really touched parts of the code that were working before. Yeah, it seems like we are just adding stuff, and this code we transferred correctly. So now this is just completely broken. I expect it to not even load properly if we try to. And I will try to. What happens? Oh, it loads. Okay, it's still, it doesn't interact anymore, but at least there is no syntax error. Good on me. Right, so tomorrow we'll be do the bit flipping situation thingy, complete this abstraction of interactive areas, use the abstraction of interactive areas over here, and perhaps we'll have time for more things, but I'm not making any promises. So thank you, John, for joining us today. And thank you, Tail, for joining me today as well. It's always nice to see you here. And yeah, bitwise stuff is fun. I agree. And I'm glad that you were entertained. I see you again tomorrow for more of this. Oh, and Bo finally is joining the party. So, hello and goodbye. Thanks for being here. See you tomorrow. Bye. Thank you for watching the stream. You know how great it has been. Or maybe it sucked, and I am glad that you stuck with me. And soon we'll all be back together for some more coding or talking or chilling. The next time I'll be streaming.